Mesa Verde empty, the megadrought that drove the ancestral Puebloans off the cliffs. What kind of civilization builds a city inside a cliff, fills it with hundreds of rooms and ceremonial chambers, and then walks away, leaving it so intact that 7 centuries later you can still see the handprints in the plaster? The people who built those cities are called the Ancestral Puebloans. They occupied the Four Corners region, where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico converge, for more than 6 centuries, from roughly 500 CE through the late 1200s. You may have heard them called the Anasazi. That term is a Navajo word considered a slur by Navajo people, and it carries no connection to the Pueblo descendants themselves. Ancestral Puebloans is the accurate, respectful name. Mesa Verde. The name means green table in Spanish, given by European explorers, is a high plateau in southwestern Colorado. Its flat top and sheltered canyons made it ideal for farming, and eventually for building something that would outlast the civilization that built it. For most of their history, the ancestral Puebloans lived on flat land, pit houses and surface villages on the mesa top, where they farmed maize, beans, and squash across the plateau's fertile soil. Some of these early pit house villages date to 550 CE, predating the cliff dwellings by more than 600 years. Between roughly 600 and 1100 CE, the population grew substantially. Villages expanded, pottery techniques sharpened, and trade networks stretched across hundreds of miles. Turquoise from the Rio Grande, shell ornaments from the Pacific coast, macaw feathers from Mesoamerica, all excavated at Chaco Canyon, the regional hub connecting Mesa Verde to the broader Southwest. Then, in the late 1100s, something shifted. Communities began moving off the mesa top and into the canyon walls. The most dramatic result was Cliff Palace, the largest cliff dwelling in the United States, carved into a natural alcove in Mesa Verde. Cliff Palace held roughly 150 rooms and 23 kivas, circular, semi-subterranean chambers used for ceremony and community gathering. At its peak, it housed approximately 100 people, functioning as a densely organized social and spiritual hub. Kivas are one of the defining features of ancestral Puebloan architecture. Each one was dug into the earth, roofed with timber, and entered from above through a ladder. They were the social and ceremonial heartbeat of every community that built them. Mesa Verde wasn't unique. Across the region, similar cliff settlements appeared. Betatacan, whose name means house on the ledge, sits inside a massive alcove in what is now Navajo Nation in northern Arizona, built during the same late 1100s period. Canyon de Chelly in Arizona holds the White House ruin, a 2-story cliff dwelling set against a sheer red canyon wall that rises nearly 700 feet above the canyon floor. These sites span hundreds of miles. This was a regional pattern, not an isolated local experiment. Why move into the cliffs at all? Defense is the most compelling answer. Cliff dwellings offered enormous tactical advantages. A single narrow access point, height above any attacker, natural stone shelter on 3 sides. Someone or something was threatening these communities. Archaeological evidence from the late 1100s and 1200s shows signs of escalating violence across the region. Burned villages, skeletal remains with trauma marks, sudden abandonment of exposed mesatop sites. Castle Rock Pueblo in Colorado, excavated by the Crow Canyon Archaeological Center, documented a massacre around 1280 CE in which at least 41 individuals were killed and left unburied. The social fabric was tearing. But Violence was a symptom, not the root cause. Underneath the conflict was a collapsing resource base, and the mechanism driving that collapse was climate. Specifically, a prolonged, devastating drought that left virtually no part of the Four Corners untouched. Tree ring data, one of the most precise climate records available for this region, shows a severe drought beginning around 1276 and lasting until at least 1299. Dendrochronologists call it the Great Drought. It struck the Four Corners with particular intensity. 23 years of below-average rainfall. For farmers entirely dependent on seasonal precipitation and carefully managed water sources, that's not a temporary hardship. That's an existential threat to every food store, every field, every community. At Mesa Verde, researchers estimate growing season precipitation dropped as much as 30% below the long-term average during the drought's peak years. The drought compounded a problem already building for decades. Pollen core analysis shows the Mesa Verde region had been stripped of timber by the mid-1200s. Centuries of fuel harvesting and construction had cleared the plateau of trees it could no longer replace. Without tree cover, topsoil eroded. Without topsoil, crop yields fell. Without reliable harvests, communities that had supported hundreds of people could no longer feed themselves. Ancient maize pollen at Mesa Verde shows a sharp decline in agricultural activity after 1250 CE, decades before the final abandonment. The cliff dwellings, for all their ingenuity, couldn't solve an agricultural collapse. The Ancestral Puebloans were not a single monolithic civilization with one leader and one decision. Treating them as one distorts what actually happened. They were a diverse collection of communities, each making independent choices in response to the same deteriorating conditions. No central authority ordered the evacuation of Mesa Verde. Dozens of separate groups reached the same conclusion on their own terms. By the late 1200s, communities across the Four Corners were making the same calculation independently. Leave. Migration routes ran south and east toward the Rio Grande Valley in New Mexico and the Little Colorado River region in Arizona. By approximately 1300 CE, Mesa Verde was empty. The cliff dwellings that had taken generations to build were left standing, pottery still on shelves, tools still in rooms, as communities moved toward more reliable water sources further south. Here's the detail that reshapes how you picture this. The Ancestral Puebloans abandoned these dwellings roughly 200 years before the first European explorers arrived in the Southwest. Europeans never encountered these cities as living places, only as ruins. This was not an extinction. It was a reorganization. The descendants of the Ancestral Puebloans are the Pueblo peoples of today. The Hopi, Zuni, Acoma, and dozens of other communities whose architecture, ceremonies, and oral traditions carry direct continuity from Mesa Verde. The kiva is the most striking evidence of that continuity. The same circular semi-subterranean ceremonial form that appeared in Mesa Verde's Cliff Palace is still built and used in Pueblo communities today, an architectural tradition spanning nearly 1,000 years. How do we know the timeline so precisely? Dendrochronology, tree ring dating, has allowed researchers to date individual construction timbers in cliff dwellings to specific years. Some beams in Mesa Verde structures are dated to within a single growing season. The 1276 to 1299 drought was severe, but it wasn't random. The North American Drought Atlas, a tree ring-based reconstruction of drought conditions spanning the past 1,000 years, compiled by researchers at Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, shows the medieval Southwest experienced repeated megadrought cycles. The late 13th century event was the most sustained, but it struck communities already weakened by earlier dry periods. That pattern matters beyond history. Research using the North American Drought Atlas and NOAA paleoclimate datasets has found that the megadrought conditions of the 1200s closely resemble projections for the 21st century Southwest under continued warming. The same region, the same stress mechanisms, the same cascading pressure on water and agriculture. Lake Powell and Lake Mead, the two largest reservoirs in the United States, both fed by the Colorado River, have spent recent years at historic lows. The same river system that once supported ancestral Puebloan communities is under pressure again, for recognizable reasons. Mesa Verde National Park was established in 1906 specifically to protect these structures. It draws roughly 600,000 visitors per year and was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1978, one of the first in the United States, for its exceptional preservation of pre-Columbian architecture anywhere in North America. Those handprints in the plaster at Cliff Palace, the ones we opened with, weren't left by people fleeing in panic. The evidence points to an organized, deliberate departure. These were communities making a rational choice in the face of conditions they could no longer sustain. Most people don't know this. Cliff Palace wasn't rediscovered by archaeologists. In December 1888, two Colorado ranchers, Richard Wetherill and Charlie Mason, were searching for stray cattle on the Mesa when they looked across a canyon and saw the 150-room city for the first time. They were the first non-indigenous people to document it. Wetherill went on to excavate dozens of sites across the region, eventually generating the political pressure that produced the Antiquities Act of 1906. The ancestral Puebloans didn't disappear, they adapted. But adaptation required moving before conditions became unrecoverable. Lake Powell's bathtub ring, the white mineral stain marking how far water levels have fallen, is a measurable threshold, the same kind of signal the Four Corners communities were reading in their drying fields. Managed early relocation beats forced catastrophic collapse. They knew that. The data says we're approaching the same decision point. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more.